Na asante sana kwa kuendelea kuwa nasi. Tunakuletea matangazo haya moja kwa moja kutoka jumba la kibiashara la Greenhouse katika barabara ya Ngong Road. Nataka tu kumpatia nafasi Esther Maina kuuliza swali kabla ya yale maswali mengine hayajajibiwa.
Sawa, majina yangu ni Esther Maina na swali langu laja kwako Bwana Irungu. In some countries like North Korea and China, we get to find that people who get themselves in corruption and serious briberies, their consequences is death sentence. Is it true that in Kenya, when we come up with such rules and laws, the human rights will it come to defend them, or what will happen?
Irungu?
So thank you very much, Esther. So under Kenyan law, it is still possible to sentence somebody to death for 4 reasons: treason, robbery with violence, or murder. And that these are the only reasons that you can sentence somebody to death. What we have found across the world as Amnesty International is that the death sentence is not a deterrent to stop people from any of these 3 or 4 crimes.
It's not working in the countries where
it does not work in the countries, and there are statistics that show that this is not the case. What does work is a legal system that cannot be compromised by corrupt individuals or cartels. So if you have a system which applies the rule of law, without any fear or favor, then you will have a situation where people will fear that law. There must be consequences. Even as Amnesty, we would argue there have to be consequences for economic crimes. But we would probably push for stiff sentences, even a life sentence if necessary, but sentences that essentially keep people away from public monies in the public interest.
Okay, and Wanjiru had a comment come in.
Yeah, and I'll probably just pick on that because society has incentives and rewards, and the incentive reward system in our society actually favors the acquisition of wealth by any means, because those who are wealthy are not asked how they got their wealth. They're able to get a lot of esteem in church, they get the media coverage, they're celebs, and we admire them and we aspire to be like them. Now, why is this? It's because the fight against corruption, or the architecture that's been built up, is very technical but doesn't have the political will. And that's linked to the issue that some said our elections process is actually undermining our governance. So we think we vote every 5 years, but it's obvious we don't, because the moment we vote in those particular leaders, they are thinking about how to pay back.
What do you mean by we don't? It's obvious we don't.
Look at now, we are already on campaign 2022. Which country can you allow a government to come in before it's even started delivering services? They have the audacity. You know, they are charging increase in VAT, cost of living is going up, services are not being delivered because, you know, there's a lot of propaganda around this, but the fact is counties aren't getting enough money to give services to the public. And yet you've got people talking about 2022. Where do they get the audacity to do this? And this is our broken political system that is, and the electoral system. So we do have a problem as a country, and we need to recognize, and as these 2 individuals, these 2, a state officer and a public officer, are now going to be arraigned in court, hopefully, and will go through this process.
With several other individuals, yes.
Yes, and several other. We need to recognize that they've left the economy in a mess. So corruption is big and it's bad, but also the kind of decisions that are made by the wrong officers in the wrong position have such detrimental consequences. So I would say another reason, apart from this broken political system that's giving us negative social incentives, the appointments that are made are often the wrong ones. If you look at the background of the CS, for instance, he was a junior officer in Treasury, and this was reported, but he had the ear of the big man, and therefore
we have that on record.
We have it. yes, it's on record. It's in media records.
It's in media record.
I think if you look at the CV, the civil service has a way that they carry out promotions. And there's a certain level of experience you need to be promoted to a CS. Henry Rotich had not attained the requisite level of expertise, but he did have a strong link to the president because he worked in a certain capacity under the president. So if you look at, was he eligible for that promotion, you would say no. And then again, and this is something interesting about the Jubilee administration. Jubilee administration brought in a lot of private sector people, and this came from the thinking that government is broken, it's corrupt. It's not necessarily it wasn't necessarily ill-intended, but the consequence has been very detrimental because a lot of private sector people like Dr. Thuge came in. These are very competent people, not much experience in public service. And you know, for Kenya, actually, we have to look back and say, what has been the impact on the public service of these people coming in, as opposed to fixing the public service? And there was a program that was being undertaken under the NAC administration called the Public Service Transformation Program. And that program fizzled out when this administration came in. This administration came in with a lot of new consultants. And if you watch the media, the public service is now actually stopping the hiring of these external consultants, because what does it do? Career civil servants who are very well trained. If you look at the budget, government spends a lot of money training its people. They're very competent. There are some very corrupt people. There are big cartels, but there are also some very well-meaning and very well-trained people. You bring in externals, then you mess up the public service system, the incentive system, the morale system, and somehow in that process, the civil service mechanisms of sanction to prevent maladministration don't work.
They don't work.
So it's not just corruption, it's also the way this administration has managed the public service sector is not working. And there are attempts to try and fix it, but I'm not sure it's enough.
That it's enough.
And that has to do, I think, you know, there's a whole thinking around government. It goes back to the kind of Vision 2030.
I'll stop you there because I don't have to go back to there just now. We need to get in a question. But I also want to say this: the individuals that were mentioned by had their suspects.
Quality of appointments and the process of appointments matters.
Yes, but I wanted to say that the individuals that you've mentioned, the conviction is upon the courts and not us here who are on the panel. I just want to make that clear for our audience once again. Whether they have qualifications or not, that's a different discussion. Mashrima, go ahead with another question.
Na mwacha nimpatie nafasi sasa Lawrence Nduva ulize swali ambalo limeulizwa awali, lakini nadhani vile yeye anavyoliuliza linaweza kupata jibu tofauti.
Asante sana. My name is Lawrence Nduva. I am a lawyer and a public policy maker with Imara Africa. My question surrounds institutional capacity of the ODPP, the DCI and the EACC. There are these glaring arrests on Fridays, which have in turn probably turned the public servants away from the office because they would want to be arrested on Friday. Do these bodies have the right capacity? We know they have the right legal mandate, they are well funded, but the cost benefit, we are not seeing it. Just arrest, no conviction. Do they have the right capacity? Should we change tact or approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question, straight to the point. Dr. Mhwana, Bwana Kimeu, I don't know who might have go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Wakili, for that question. I think we need to contextualize the issue of capacity. Yes, I'm aware that the judiciary has capacity challenges. The judiciary was meant to be digitalized. For instance,
it's been a discussion for a long time.
Indeed.
That's right.
There is no justification why a government which came into power singing the digital song should stand in the way of digitalization of the judiciary. I mean, those judges and magistrates have to listen to the case, right at the same time, examine the demeanor of the witness, and there are volumes and volumes of cases to write. To be fair to their human capacity, it's not a fair expectation. So yes, as far as the judiciary is concerned, there are challenges. But more importantly, the challenge that they also have is that the money that they have requested from the government has never been given. So they would rather fund Kimwarer and Aror than fund the judiciary. Yet, if the judiciary is not well funded, the DPP may do all the excellent job. The DCI may do all the excellent job. It will still come to naught in the judiciary. So some of the blame that we've been heaping on the judiciary is undeserved. There are men and women in the judiciary who do a lot of good work, but for the incapacitation. Now, let me also talk about the issue of lack of capacity on the DPP.
DCI, EACC.
Yes, DPP.
All the bodies.
I go to court every other day. I'm a criminal law practitioner, and I can attest that the staff at the DPP are overstretched. These guys who have been arrested today will go for the best legal mind in this country to defend them. All that I'll be doing as a lawyer is to study the charges and pull all stops to defend Henry Rotich, for instance. But the guy who is for the DPP has 10 files to study the same night. When I have one file for 2 months, they stand no chance against me. So there are capacity challenges in the DPP, and this is something that we must be fair. The DCI, I wouldn't talk much, but yes, we also know that the forensic laboratory, for example, never gone through. So there are capacity challenges, that's a fact. But before I hang on, ladies and gentlemen, we must be very clear that the problem we have is not about capacitation so much or lack of it. The problem we have is that we have wrong guys in offices. Simple and clear. Why is it that Jubilee has not done what they promised? The young people here,
they insist that they have.
You were promised 16 stadiums when they came to power in 2013. Not even a quarter an acre of a stadium has been built. Why haven't you demonstrated and insisted they go back home because they have not delivered on mandate? And many other things. The problem we have will be fixed when we fix the politics of this country.
Okay.
But for as long as we are not fix the politics of this country, we shall cry and cry till Jesus Christ comes back.
Okay, a very strong warning there from Dr. Mukhwana. Kimeu, I'll come to you shortly. Let's get another question in.
Kwanza nimpatie nafasi sasa Vance aulize swali lake.
My name is Vance Wekesa, and I direct my question to Dr. Lutalala and Mr. Kimeu. And this is with regard to the recent Court of Appeal decision in the Mombo Amuti case, where the EACC was actually allowed to recover the assets, the unexplained assets in the Mombo Amuti case. Yes, where the EACC was allowed to recover the assets. And my question then is, moving forward, should we take this approach of asset recovery less of a conviction, other than focusing on convictions which we never get, so that we go after the money? Because if the asset recovery agency can manage to secure or recover the assets, less of that particular conviction, don't you think it's an effective way of even fighting this particular graft?
Okay. Before you come in, Dr. Mukhwana, Kimeu, you have a thought on that?
Allow me to step back to a question that was asked around the death punishment.
Go ahead.
I don't support death punishment, and I think our problem is not the lack of severity of punishment. It is actually our failure to enforce it. That even where you have convictions, there are very few cases where judges and magistrates are giving maximum sentences, even under the law. So for me, I would be interested to have a conversation about stiffer penalties if you deliver on the minor penalties. And if you deliver on the so-called lenient penalties consistently, you will find you will not need any stiffer penalties. So the value of the law is in its enforcement. As a matter of fact, if you don't enforce the law, it's not worth the paper on which it is written. It cannot be called law properly, so-called. I think on the question of capacity, my answer would be yes and no. And I think Dr. Lutalala has answered this very well. For me, I think it is a question of interest and will. There is capacity everywhere. You know, our institutions are not bad in any way, from looking for capacity within government, outside government in this country, and outside the borders of this country. As a matter of fact, there are many international agencies and countries that would be interested to support us in the same way that we have exported capacity to other countries to support them in their own quest to face the challenges that they face. And we've done that admirably. And I would say that this country has one of the best trained human resources that you will find on this continent. That's not disputable. So for us to say that we don't have capacity, in my view, is to be dishonest. It's that we have not placed the right capacity in the right place because we don't want to. I think the question, the Amuti case is an interesting case for me, and I have spoken about this before. This case started way back in 2012. This case basically does away with the myth that we cannot do lifestyle audits in this country, because that has been an argument that has been peddled around in the last 1 year, that we don't have a legal framework. We have held the view that since the Public Officer Ethics Act was enacted in 2003 and provided for mandatory wealth declarations, wealth assets and liabilities declaration for all public officers after every 2 years, we already have a framework. That cannot have been an end in itself. You don't declare and then it's an end in itself. There was a context which we have again refused to enforce. It's a political question. Recently you saw that we were doing lifestyle audits on procurement officers.
That's right.
We made no reference whatsoever to the provisions of the Public Officer Ethics Act. And so if there were declarations that these officers had made, we basically made nonsense of them. And as a matter of fact, there's no incentive to declare assets if it is meaningless to do it. So I think that case is a very important one. It has opened the doors for us. We cannot make excuses anymore. The doors are open for us. So if we want to pursue illicitly acquired wealth, unexplainedly wealth,
a precedent has
everything
been set.
is there.
Okay.
But let me also add something else,
briefly,
Maura. There's another case that just came out last week, I think a week or two ago, which basically says that the EACC has to give notice to people that it is investigating. This is also a decision at the highest level of this country, which is of course disturbing. The judges are looking at the law itself, but the truth of the matter is, if that is done, practically you cannot, unless the judiciary can guarantee that the subject matter of these investigations will be preserved, then I think it is an erroneous decision.
Okay.
It behooves Parliament to move very quickly and amend that law.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I think that's a good place to take a break, Daktari, before you come in, and Wanjiru as well, and Irungu, ready there to jump in on this discussion as well. Matters corruption, and really a lot of thoughts coming up about different ways to deal with it in this country. For a country that doesn't rank very well on the Transparency International Index, and our numbers have not been getting better over the years. We play around the number 140, 148 or so, and that is something of concern. And thank you to everyone who's weighing in on this discussion. 22422 is the SMS line. The hashtag is Monday Report. We'll be right back with more.